Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode may be one of my favorites yet because, well, long story short, this episode introduces the Hex Girls into the Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated continuity, and if you guys don't know what they are a recurring group of characters, they're a recurring trio of characters that have appeared since, what is it? They've appeared since one of the Scooby-Doo movies where they try to find a missing. I forget what it's called. I'll put the actual title down on the bottom of the screen. But basically the Hex Girls have appeared since that movie and have been a recurring group of characters ever since. And they always show up in some of the more Halloween-y themed stuff. They'll always show up. They'll always perform, and they're close friends with the Mystery Inc. gang because they've been at the center of a couple of different mysteries up to that point. So they're pretty close with Mystery Inc. overall. But in any case, this episode actually opens up with them in the middle of a concert. They're singing their song of the same name, Hex Girls. But yeah, in any case, as they're singing, as they're performing the concert, Daphne and Fred are staying next together with the rest of the group, and Daphne merely remarks that she's a little surprised they were able to get such great seats, wondering how exactly they were able to get such good seats, pointing out that she thought you would need to be a scalper to get such good tickets, But Fred merely reassures her that it's not really all that complicated, and that the fact of the matter is they just know Velma, and as it turns out, Velma, in this continuity at least, is a massive Hex Girls fan, and presumably bought the tickets day one, and immediately as soon as they went available, she just kind of went out and bought the tickets, and now they're front row seats. Meanwhile, Shaggy is trying to film the concert on his handheld camera, but Scooby, still upset about what happened in the previous episode, very much is getting in his way intentionally, and is very much messing up his shot, and is very angry at Shaggy for going to prom instead of sitting down to watch the Vincent Van Gogh marathon with him, and when Daphne asks him what Scooby's problem is, he literally just reiterates exactly what I just told you about how he's still upset over what happened in the last episode, and probably won't be forgiving him anytime soon. But in any case, as they're actually performing on stage, as the Hex Girls are performing on stage and are finishing up their song, the villain of the episode, the Phantom, he actually shows up on stage and loudly declares that the Hex Girls actually need to back down and stop making music, or they'll suffer his wrath. But Thorn, the leader of the Hex Girls, actually does not listen and proceeds to just kind of tell him off, pointing out that nobody tells the Hex Girls what to do. And with that, proceeds to continue playing and wowing the crowd, but which only serves to enrage the Phantom, and he uses an electric projectile from his gloves to knock at one of the amps on top of Thorn, which winds up injuring her, and Scooby and Shaggy winds up getting the whole thing on camera and proceeds to upload the incident to their in-universe version of YouTube called EarTube, but yeah, in any case, after uploading it to that nondescript name brand site, their roadie, Daniel Prezette, he actually confronts the Hex Girls about it and tells them that they actually may need to cancel the show, cancel the concerts, pointing out that it's clearly too dangerous, but Thorn merely snaps back at him, pointing out that they're not going to cancel the show since they've worked really hard on it, and proceeds to tell him that to just stick to what he's good at, which is writing songs. At which point their very eccentric manager, Gary Bogg, who speaks in very old-timey English. He's a very eccentric man who likes to kind of sort of speak in riddles. But in any case, he then proceeds to point out that obviously this is a very big deal, and that obviously the Phantom is going to continue to cause problems for them, so they need to think of a plan to actually stop the Phantom from attacking them and maybe catch him in the act. And it's at this point where Fred realizes that in order to solve the mystery, they're going to need to figure out a way to maybe set up some bait for the Hex Girl for the traps and make sure that nobody can actually. And make sure that that Thorn isn't in any actual danger. So he realizes that he actually needs to put in the place of a stunt double to actually make sure that that the real Thorn is actually safe. And obviously, Velma is immediately the first volunteer. She immediately runs up to Fred and demands that he makes her the quote unquote stunt double. But in any case, he decides to actually choose Daphne instead. And what we do find out is that Daphne actually does have a pretty good set of lungs on her, and she proceeds to make a performance and put on a small performance in front of the Hex Girls, which they approve of and they decide to actually make her a fully fledged Hex Girl and make her the stand-in for Thorn. With Fred pointing out that now that they have her in place, that they'll be able to actually catch the Phantom with her acting as Thorn bait, which she's very happy about until she realizes that Fred is just using her to set as bait for his trap, which annoys her quite a bit. But in any case. But in case with that, Daphne actually winds up getting dressed up in a Thorn costume, while Scooby, Shaggy, and Fred actually wind up setting up the traps above the stage so that they can actually trap the Phantom before he can cause any sort of problems. And Fred is very interesting in the scene in that he's very much taking the traps seriously. He's very much holding up obviously Fred is very obsessed with traps in this continuity, and very much loves traps. But it is just another interesting detail that he goes to such great lengths to make sure his traps are perfect. Case in point, he tells Shaggy and Scooby to make sure that the knots are perfect and tight, and make sure that, and be sensitive. Obviously, they don't want any loose cables or anything, causing problems with the trap and causing it to fall early. And while Scooby gets his nuts done no problem, Shaggy winds up getting his hand stuck, and even tells Fred that he wound up having a bad knot. At which point Fred actually tells Scooby to go and help Shaggy with his knot, but obviously Scooby's still angry at Shaggy, declares that the knot is fine, and proceeds to just walk off. But in case with that, they then proceed to get ready to go into the concert where Daphne is actually a little bit nervous. But Thorn merely tells her that the whole Thorn look she has going on is actually a very good look for Daphne, and she merely remarks that she hopes so, points out that she's not entirely sure who she's more scared of, the Phantom or the fans. But in any case, with that, now performing her as the stunt double for Thorn, she then proceeds to go out on the stage with Luna and Dusk and proceeds to perform Wind, Earth, Fire, and Air, which again is another recurring song for the Hex Girls and is one of the more popular ones. But in any case, in mid-performance, the Phantom actually winds up showing up and proceeds to try and attack Daphne with Fred really pointing out that it's now time to actually trigger the traps. And with that he then proceeds to trigger the traps, but that only results in him somehow managing to trap both the Hex Girls that are actually on stage, and Daphne winds up getting kidnapped by the Phantom, which once again causes Fred to become a little bit hysterical. And later that day, they actually wind up doing a police report for Sheriff Stone, pointing out that Daphne is missing and he needs to do something about it. But throughout the scene, he's a little bit more concerned with taking some Hex Girl merch back home with him rather than actually doing the police report, aka his job. And even the first thing he says in the scene once he's reintroduced is this full cotton, right? Is this an actual full cotton shirt? But yeah, in any case, the rest of the group merely insists that they actually do need to find another way to actually find, that they do actually need to find Daphne, since she's been kidnapped and is missing. But he merely responds that he doesn't really know what he can do to help them. Since obviously there's a couple of things that are very wrong with the whole scenario, and it's at this point where Dusk actually kind of chews Sheriff Stone out, pointing out that he doesn't seem like he's concerned with actually doing anything, but Sheriff Stone merely remarks that he's actually going to be doing his due diligence on his job, which is to mainly take some t-shirts home with him and then call the mayor and let him know what's up, pointing out that that's what he does. and with that, he just kind of leaves. At which point, but also before he leaves, he actually notes that Fred is acting a little bit squirrely, and Fred even confesses that he knows that he thinks that he's a little bit worried, that he's not entirely sure why he's so squirrely. Merely pointing out that it's either the fact that he's upset about his trap not working, about his trap not working, the Phantom taking Daphne, or both. He actually doesn't fully understand himself, but in case one Sheriff Stone leaves to actually calm himself down, he decides to go and investigate his trap and see what could have possibly gone wrong, and also maybe look for Daphne's. And the rest of the group concluding that Daphne is likely still somewhere in the building, since obviously the Phantom couldn't have taken her far, decide to actually branch out and look. And Shaggy actually decides at this moment to actually maybe try and break the ice with Scooby by leaving a trail of popcorn for Scooby to find while he's actually sniffing around. And Shaggy very much tells Scooby that he can have the piece of popcorn that he found, but Scooby merely turns his back on Shaggy and merely just turns around in a huff. At which point Shaggy points out that Scooby can't actually still be mad at him forever, and does point out that eventually they are going to have to talk to each other, otherwise they'll have to get new best friends. Which Scooby decides is a great idea, and with that he then proceeds to leave, with Shaggy being confused, also wondering what Scooby thought was a good idea, since he doesn't fully understand. He just gave Scooby the idea to make a new best friend. Meanwhile, Fred is actually investigating his traps and is kind of narrating his thoughts out loud to himself. And he actually winds up going through the motions and actually starts checking the traps. And after still worrying about whether or not he actually cares about his traps or Daphne, he merely notes that he notices something interesting, which is that the trap was clearly sabotaged, because he notices hand lotion is all over the pulley that was supposed to set up the traps. And after seeing that, concludes that it wasn't his fault that the trap went wrong. But then wonders again why he actually still feels the way he does, and then eventually concludes that it must be Daphne, and wonders about it why he cares so much about her, and wishes that he didn't. Unfortunately for him, it's revealed that Daphne was actually tied up in the scaffolding above him, and the rope proceeds holding her proceeds to break as Fred is actually finally working through his feelings. And once she's quote unquote gone, he finally concludes that he actually does have feelings for Daphne, and realizing he now has feelings, he realizes that now they need to actually go and find Daphne. And with that, he then proceeds to run back downstairs and decides to tell everybody the good news, only to discover that his dad is there and has decided to actually continue with the concert with the Hex Girls as planned. But where we actually do find out, but in the process, he actually points out that he's also making it Phantom Day at the performance site, and merely tells Fred not to mess everything up and leave the Phantom alone at least until after the performance. And with that, he just kind of leaves, pointing out that it's just good for good revenue for the city. But in any case, Fred, still a little confused as to what's going on. Tells his dad that tells his dad as he's leaving that he can't just stop everything because they need to find Daphne. But then Daphne actually walks up with Gary Bogg and Daniel Prezette, and proceeds to point out that she's completely fine and is right there, having apparently been rescued by the two of them. But she merely responds with hostility to Fred, pointing out that she heard everything that Fred had said, but he merely realizes but he quickly realizes that Daphne actually didn't feel the whole thing. So, and he does proceed to point that out to her, but she's merely angry at him, pointing out that she's not going to sit idly by and let herself be kidnapped again, and decides that she's going to go back on and perform on stage again as a Hex Girl. But even though Fred insists that it's dangerous, she decides she doesn't care, and tells the other Hex Girls to proceed to get ready to make her a star. And with that, everybody else leaves. And Mayor Fred Jones Sr., just realizing that now everybody's on the same page, actually leaves for real this time and walks out of the dome that they're in. But in any case with that, Thorne merely asks Daphne if she actually wants to go through with it. which Daphne merely concurs that she does, and tells them to quote unquote make her a rock star. So they proceed to do exactly that by getting her a new outfit and a new hairstyle. And Velma watches the whole thing and asks the Hex Girls to make her into a rock star as well, but when they kind of ignore her, she just kind of goes to sulk in the corner, which is kind of sad and a little bit funny. But in any case, Fred, having left the performance site where they were, decides to actually start working through his feelings about Daphne. After thinking about it, pointing out that he's a guy, and guys are not supposed to have feelings according to Fred, which is not a thing. He after working through his feelings, he decides that he is indeed in love with Daphne and Traps, and proceeds to point that he's going to tell Daphne how he feels out loud, for everybody can hear him. And even calls attention that declaring his love for Daphne in the middle of the street on Crystal Cove that he's just walking on, and proceeds to walk back to where the concert is about to be held. And with that, he then proceeds to actually walk into the building and asks to actually see Daphne. But by this point, Daphne has actually completely undergone her transformation as a Hex Girl and started going by Crush, which is now her stage name. But in any case, that Fred doesn't fully understand that Crush and Daphne are the same person. So once Daphne actually tells him that they are indeed the same person, because he's an idiot. But he realizes he merely stops her to tell her that he actually has feelings for her. But she doesn't really care, and actually stands her ground against Fred, pointing out that he's moved on, and that she doesn't really want him to be in her life right now, because she's still trying to work out her feelings over him and what he said. And with that, she tells the rest of the Hex Girls to kick him out. With Daphne pointing out that with Velma actually pointing out that that's the first time Daphne has actually stood her ground against Fred, and is a little impressed, and wonders how she feels. But and Daphne really laments that she actually feels kind of lousy for having to do that. Meanwhile, what we find out is that Scooby, in the interim, and this was a thing from when Mayor Jones actually showed up in the episode. But Scooby has since found a new best friend. As we find out, he has since taken up Shaggy's old ventriloquist dummy, and has start calling it Harry, and has started treating it like it's his new best friend. Which has started to annoy Shaggy quite a bit. And this very much comes to a head when Scooby and Harry decide to actually sit down to watch a Vincent Van Gogh movie, which winds up being the last straw for Shaggy, pointing out that Harry isn't real, and obviously that they should stop watching the Vincent Van Gogh movies together, quote unquote together, because that's their thing. At which point Scooby, as Harry, winds up confronting Shaggy about his thing with Velma, and tells him that he thought Shaggy cared more about girls than he does about his best friend and watching Vincent Van Gogh movies. But this merely results in Shaggy getting into a quote unquote fight with Harry. And after a few minutes of struggling with the puppet, eventually realizes that Harry isn't actually real. And after realizing that Harry actually can't fight back, he proceeds to kick the puppet's head off and tell Scooby to stop being ridiculous. But however, it's at this moment where the Phantom actually winds up showing up in the Hex Girls bus, where Scooby and Shaggy are actually watching the movie while they're waiting for the rest of the gang to actually work everything out. But and the Phantom merely declares that now that one head is actually rolled off and fallen off, that there only is two left to go. And with that, he proceeds to in a classic Scooby-Doo chase sequence, proceeds to chase Shaggy and Scooby around the Hex Girls' living quarters in their tour bus to try and catch them. And once again, is one of these very classic moments where the bad guy just kind of chases them around the place, but he does eventually wind up just giving up against them. But But in any case, after wondering if he actually has indeed left, Shaggy immediately points out that one of them should actually go and look. But Scooby declares that he actually doesn't care. That he actually kind of doesn't care about all of that, pointing out that he's not going to go look. But Shaggy decides he isn't going to go look either. And eventually, they smell something burning. And when they poke their head out, they discover that the Phantom has actually set the tour bus on fire. At which point Shaggy and Scooby quickly realize that they're trapped, and Scooby immediately asks Harry to save them, but Shaggy gets annoyed at, but then realizes that that's actually a good idea, and then proceeds to pluck Harry's body from Scooby's arms and proceeds to throw the ventriloquist dummy through the window so that they can escape. And Scooby, and this also causes Harry's head, which has since been separated from the puppet's body, to actually land near them. And Scooby merely remarks that he saved them, and Shaggy initially thinks that Scooby is talking about him, but then he realizes that Scooby is actually talking to the puppet, which causes him to become even more annoyed. So it's but it's at this point where he actually notices that Harry has a clue in his quote-unquote mouth. As he finds out a part of the Phantom's costume is actually ripped off, and Shaggy actually recognizes the fabric from somewhere, and proceeds to pluck up the fabric and start Googling something on his laptop. And then what we find out is that it's actually part of a costume for a performer named Fancy Pants, who apparently we haven't seen in a long time, and apparently he apparently hasn't performed in a while. But what we do find out is an interesting little piece of trivia, which is that Gary Bogg, the manager of the Hex Girls, used to be the manager for Fancy Pants, and pointing out that there seems to be some sort of strange connection there, decides to actually go and act on it. So he proceeds to scoop up his laptop and shows Gary his what he found. But Gary denies the accusations, pointing out that he is not the Phantom simply because he's Fancy Pants' manager, and proceeds to point out that Fancy Pants actually is no longer working because the record company actually dropped him in favor of the Hex Girls. He's no longer. So yeah, because of that, he's no longer a famous rock star like at all. So with that, he's no longer around and is no longer performing. So, and with that, he just kind of leaves after dropping that little nugget of information. But it's at this point where Fred, who was also in there with him, proceeds to wonder what else they could actually do, and Shaggy reiterates that point, pointing out that they need to actually figure out a way to actually trap the Phantom and actually find a way to actually defeat him, and Scooby actually asks Harry for advice, wondering if Harry will be able to help, and this annoys Shaggy, and he starts yelling at Scooby for it, until Fred actually corrects him and points out that they can actually use Harry to their advantage as well, and that it's not just this weird thing that Scooby is doing. But in any case with that, Dave actually switches back to Hex Girls with Daphne actually performing a new song, and Daphne has no idea what she wants to do with it, pointing out that she keeps stopping the performance to point out that it doesn't feel quite right, and it's at this point where Thorne actually pulls her aside and points out that she's been in the same situation that Daphne's in with her quote-unquote crush. As we find out, and this is apparently a bit of a character development for Thorne that I think is only canon to this continuity and nothing else, but Thorne tells Daphne that she used to have a crush as well. She was actually in love with a carny named Knuckles, who was very much in a situation who was very much similar to Fred, in that he ran one of those gravity-based tilt-a-whirl rides where you get stuck to the wall and you spin at 60 miles per hour. One of those. I don't know what the actual ride is called, but Thorne merely points out that the two of them were close, but Knuckles actually wound up loving the ride more than he loved her, so they wound up breaking up. And when Daphne wonders how she actually got over it, she merely responds that she started writing music and actually used a song to get over it, and proceeds to point out that they can use the same thing to actually maybe help Daphne, and the two decide to actually write a song together, which we do actually wind up hearing. So later that night, after Fred has actually set up all of his traps, in an effort to actually catch the Phantom again, and rectify his mistake from earlier in the episode, the four of them actually wind up sitting down. Daphne actually winds up retreating from the sky and with this big lift thing, where she actually winds up sitting down in a cloak and before proceeding to take it off as part of her performance. Which is a really cool and is a really important thing because it actually winds up being the trigger for the trap later. But what she actually winds up but in the process, but while she's actually doing that, while she's actually performing, she sings the song "Trap of Love," which is heavily implied to be about Fred. And Velma merely asks Fred what he thinks about the new song, and Fred, after hearing some of the lyrics and realizing that the song is about him, and more specifically about how Daphne feels like she needs to actually fly free from Fred, as it were. He realizes that he understands completely what the song is about. But in case after Daphne sits back down and puts her cloak back on, it's at this point where the Phantom decides to actually take his move and declaring that the Hex Girls, he told the Hex Girls to stop performing, they disobeyed him, and now they have to pay the price. And for that, he then proceeds to attack Daphne. And which actually winds up setting off the trap because he doesn't realize that Daphne had actually switched places with Harry, who is revealed to be the trigger for the trap, and he winds up getting caught in his own net. So it winds up getting caught in the net and being trapped that way. And at which point Fred Jones Sr., who was apparently in the area, watched the whole thing unfold. Merely shows up and tells Fred that he should have waited until after the performance to stop the Phantom, but points out that there's nothing they can really do about it now. At which point, Fred declares that he's now going to unmask the Phantom, but in any case, what we actually find out in that scene is that the culprit is actually Daniel Prezette, who's obviously the Hex Girls roadie, and song manager. But what we also find out from Shaggy, because he recognizes him, is that Daniel Prezette is actually Fancy Pants. As we find out after Fancy Pants sort of got retired prematurely, he decided to actually take his vengeance out on the Hex Girls, which he points out he wanted to actually start writing songs for them, but then realizing that wasn't enough because they're too good, he decides to actually start sabotaging their performances as the Phantom. And when Gary Bug actually asks Mr. Ink how they actually figured it out, he merely Fred and the others merely respond that obviously it had to be somebody who could easily get to all of the backstage locations to actually set up all of these things that the Phantom has been doing. So obviously that only really left the one culprit, which was Daniel Prezette. So with that, Daniel Prezette is actually hauled off by the police after being arrested. And with that, the Hex Girls actually wind up packing up their tour bus, or at least what's left of it, and proceed to drive out of the city after thanking Mr. Ink for stopping the Phantom and actually saving the day. At which point, Fred actually realizes that Daphne is actually standing alone and decides to go and comfort her. And Daphne immediately responds that it seems like her days as a rock star are over, but at which point Fred actually decides to confess his feelings for her, and he points out that he both loves her and traps and isn't entirely sure how he feels, but he hasn't entirely sure how he's worked out her feelings for her yet, and isn't entirely sure if that makes him a man anymore, since obviously he doesn't think men are supposed to care and be these unfeeling things. So he decides that since he's a non-man, he should at the very least act like one, in deciding that and does decide that he loves both Traps and Daphne, and wonders and asks her if that makes sense. And Daphne merely responds that under normal circumstances, no, but since she knows what Freddy's trying to say, she completely understands. Meanwhile, Scooby and Shaggy actually make up over the fact that Harry was quote unquote taken by the Phantom, which Shaggy merely comforting Scooby, pointing out that he knew the dummy meant a lot to him, and obviously now that it's gone, he's no longer going to be able to just kind of keep it, since obviously it's been taken into evidence by the police. But Scooby merely remarks that it's fine and that Shaggy is really the only dummy that he needs. And with that, they then proceed to make up as Velma watches the whole thing a little bit annoyed and uncomfortable over the fact that she's once again playing second fiddle to Scooby. So yeah, this episode does kind of continue a couple of plot threads from the previous episode, or in the previous episodes prior, namely that this episode continues the fact that Scooby is still annoyed at Shaggy for what happened during the Alice May episode, but more to the point, this also continues the thread that Fred has secret feelings for Daphne, and he finally works them out in this episode, which is interesting and important. But also, more to the point, this episode is just an excuse to reintroduce the Hex Girls into the Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated continuity, and I think that's kind of neat and groovy. So yeah, there's nothing else I can say about that. That's really what the episode was. It was really just an excuse to introduce the Hex Girls into the story, and I kind of don't really have any complaints about that. The Hex Girls are amazing. But in any case, yeah, that's my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. In any case, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. But in any case, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. Top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!